Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chart. Today's free webinar is being offered by Corbin Nichols of PIADA Restaurants. Welcome, Corbin.
Thank you so much, Tara. All right, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Really excited to talk about one of my favorite conversation topics and something that we all as hospitality trainers really use day in and day out, whether we know it or not. And that is our not so secret weapon that we have, which is storytelling. Storytelling is so many things, but ultimately it's really just about sharing a different perspective on what it is that we have and what we want to convey, what we want to get across. So today we're going to talk about how we unleash this not so secret weapon. But I always like to start off with a quote. And today's quote is that every story has already been told. Once you've read Anna Karenina, Bleak House, The Sound and the Fury, To Kill a Mockingbird, and A Wrinkle in Time, you understand that there is really no reason to ever write another novel, except that each writer brings to the table, if she will let herself, something that no one else in the history of time has ever had. And that's by Anna Quindlen, who did receive a Pulitzer Prize as well, and that was part of a commencement speech that she provided many years ago. And, you know, I thought it was probably a good time in today's day and age to share some good quotes from commencement speeches, considering all the things that we're dealing with day in and day out in the news. But with this, I want you to take a moment, take a beat, and I want you to really think of a time. And I want you to think of a time that you used hard facts, graphs, and data, but the message was lost among your audience. Or a time that you made a connection through emotion or experience. Maybe a time that your audience checked out early, or you could start feeling them really pull away from what it was that you were saying. Maybe a time that you felt like you facilitated a great presentation. I mean, you just knocked it out of the park. It was incredible. But then afterwards found that it had little to no lasting impact. Maybe think of a time that you sat through a boring meeting that could have been an email. I know that we've all had those. Or maybe a time that you read a boring email there. Or think of a time that you felt inspired to step immediately into action, leaving a conference. The difference between a lot of these is the difference between when we use storytelling and share stories as a part of our example, as a part of the message that we're trying to get across, as a part of our why. There is so much noise that we have to deal with day in and day out in our industry. And so for that, stories are our not so secret weapon. The problem is that many of us don't really know how to make our stories the most impactful or where to begin even with a story. So for today's agenda, we're going to go through first and foremost why storytelling matters. Then we're going to get into some specific storytelling tactics. We're going to talk about how to build a story. And then we'll finish up with where to start your story. So to dive into this, I am not on video today. I do apologize about that, but I end up using so much of the screen with these PowerPoints that I felt like if I was on video, it might block part of the screen. So for that reason, I'm going to be taking Kelly's presentation, her PowerPoint class, this coming Chart in Chicago. So if you're going to be attending Chart 106 in Chicago, please come take Kelly's class as well. But we'll dive right into this with why storytelling matters. So from a storytelling perspective and why we want to use it as trainers, why it's so important to us within our organizations to use it, I go back to Jean Piaget. And Jean Piaget was the director of International Bureau of Education in 1934. And Jean really was responsible for coming up with a theory that we're going to be talking about today when it comes to why storytelling is so important with what it is that we do. But Jean had a quote that I really admired, which is, "Only education is capable of saving our societies from possible collapse, whether violent or gradual." Education is the penultimate piece of what it is that we do. We train, we give training, we give formal education through our concepts, through our work, through what it is that we do day in and day out. And really passing this along to the next generation is the only thing that saves us from possible collapse. With that being said, Jean was really the launch point for me when I started understanding childhood psychology, which I am no expert in, but it's really interesting and fascinating when we start diving into it, because everything that we do for the people that we hire today is representative of the phases of learning, of how people actually learn, and the 4 stages of the cognitive development in theory. So with this, first and foremost, why storytelling matters, it's important for us to understand how people learn and what the stages of growth and learning are, because it really does paint a clear picture of why storytelling should be a part of our arsenal. So there are 4 different stages, and we'll go through them. They're basically broken into specific age ranges, and those age ranges are approximate. Everybody learns differently, grows differently at a different pace and practice. But ultimately, the general years that are associated with the different stages all stay to be generally the same. And with that, I'm going to break down into each of these stages. The first one being the sensory motor stage of the cognitive development in theory. And this is when you are age 0 to 2. Now, this is where you start to learn as a child about object permanence. If you've been around a 0 to 2-year-old, you know that peekaboo is one of the greatest games, because you disappear completely. You disappear completely, and then the moment you remove your hands, all of a sudden you're back. Object permanence. We're learning in this age, in this sensory motor skill set, this place of development, about what it means to have an object that stays and just is and is right there. Now, as a side note, I do have to acknowledge that, yes, that is a picture of me when I was a baby. That is the youngest picture that I have of myself, or the oldest picture, I guess you would say, of myself. I don't have many baby pictures of when I was young, but that is of me. And that's because for me, I don't have kids, and it's difficult to find photos of other people's children when they are in specific age ranges and brackets and everything. So we'll be using photos of myself for these pieces and periods. So that's the first stage, sensory motor stage. Then as we go into the next stage, we go into the pre-operational stage. And this is when we're between the ages of 2 and 7 years old. And between 2 and 7, roughly, that's when we're beginning to do pretend to play. And we're beginning to understand what symbols are. We're really beginning to understand the world around us. But we stay very self-based, and everything is very egocentric between the ages of 2 and 7. It's all about us, us, us. It's not a negative thing to say it's egocentric. It's just we're experiencing the world through our own dynamic interaction with it. Everything is about us versus about those around us. So after we get out of the pre-operational stage, we move into what's called the concrete operational stage. And that is anywhere between the ages of 7 to 11 years old. And this is where we begin to use logic. And we're beginning to use logic in concrete ways that we didn't experience in the past, ways that didn't make sense to us. And a great example of this is the glass of water. Between the ages of 7 and 11, when you get into this concrete operational stage, that's really where somebody could potentially take the tall, skinny glass of water, set it in front of you next to another glass of tall, skinny glass of water, and say, how much is in each? And we'd say, yeah, that's the same amount of water in each. And then you could take it and you could pour one of those into a short, fat glass, and it would look like a different volume of water. And at this age range, this concrete operational development stage, we're really using logic to say, well, no, I saw it come from one vessel to the other. I know it's the same amount of water in the new glass, even though it looks different. This is where we're starting to really understand and use assimilation to take in and make logical reasoning conclusions in what it is that we're doing. And then after this, we get into middle school and into high school. So I used one of my high school yearbook photos here, where we're into the formal operational role. And that's anything from 12 up. And this is where we begin using a more sophisticated use of logic in what it is that we're doing. We're able to analyze the environment around us and make deductions. We're able to take in information a little bit differently as we learn and we grow. But I do have to admit, this isn't actually what I looked like in high school. I'm sorry. No, I was a theater kid. I was a nerd. So in actuality, this was my high school yearbook photo right here. So I apologize, but you were able to analyze the environment and make some deductions that didn't quite add up. That didn't really make too much sense there, that I would look like that and have a full beard in high school like that. So anyways, you were using your formal operational skill set to be able to truly take in the information and utilize it for your knowledge and make a logical guess. So with this, when we look at this, this is where we can move into the ideas of assimilation, which is involving the incorporation of new events into pre-existing cognitive structures. This is what this whole concrete operational or formal operational stage is all about. And then we move into accommodation, which is when we take existing structures and they change for us to accommodate new information. As a child, you might see a cat sleeping, and then you might see a cat awake and scratching a post. And through accommodation, you're able to start recognizing and seeing, okay, the cat is able to make different things happen. So assimilation and accommodation allows us to form a schema as we go through everything. And equilibration is what we're in pursuit of. This is where the person strikes a balance between themselves and their environment, between the assimilation and accommodation. And this is really what storytelling does. Storytelling allows us to take in new information, but to accommodate it to what we know, to what we already have experienced, to what we already have existing within us. And it allows us to have that aha moment between new information coming in and being able to relate to it specifically. So a way that Jean Piaget actually put this is to say that to understand is to discover or reconstruct by rediscovery. And such conditions must be complied with if in the future individuals are to be formed who are capable of production and creativity and not simply repetition. And as trainers, this is exactly what we're passionate about. Getting those to care about creativity and production and not just repeating an answer, but how can they take it and put it into motion and that they understand it and they can teach it and train it on their own as well, and not just memorize things. Memorization is a great tool, but if you want a fully developed member of your team, it's important to have them be capable of production and creativity. So storytelling really allows the learner to balance the assimilation with accommodation. That's why storytelling matters. That's why we do exactly what we do, and why it's our greatest weapon that we have, because we can present a new scene, new data, a new understanding, and our learner can take that and relate it to exactly what it is that they're dealing with on a day-to-day, or to have an aha moment behind the scenes. So I'm going to be using tactics today and explaining these tactics, because chart is all about stealing shamelessly. And so this is something that I've picked up and learned through my career and my path. And I wanted to share it with everybody here. And this is all based off of Story Building Tactics by Steve Rawling. And I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end as well. So if you do have questions, feel free to save them for the end Q&A, as Tara was mentioning. But Steve Rawling really put together this storytelling tactic playbook about how do you create and craft a story. So I'm going to show you a flow chart for storytelling, because if you're wanting to know why a story is so important or how to create and craft a story, this is really going to be your playbook to figure out what story you need to tell or what tactic you need to use. And there's many tactics that we use in every story that we tell, but this will help you really build your story from start to finish. So here with this flow chart specifically, it's important to break this down. Do you know why you need a story? And if not, you would use what we call the concept tactic. If you do know, then you need to know where to find your story. If you don't know, then you have to use an explore tactic to really explore and find where the story is. If you're familiar with where to find your story, you need to know what your role is in the story. And if you don't know, well, this is where you can start using the character tactics. Do you know what your story needs to do? If not, then we need to use the function tactics. Do you know how to plan your story, what the structure should be? Do you know how to tell your story, what the style of your story should be? And lastly, do you know how to share your story appropriately? And so through this flow chart, really it's all about the why, the where, the you, the what. What's the plan? How are we going to tell it? How are we going to share this story? So what we're going to do is we're going to break into each of these items. And Steve has so much content out there that you can learn from and take. But really what I'm going to do is give you a high level overview of what each of these concept, explore, character, function, structure, style, and organized tactics are. And then from there, we'll break into what an example of that might look like and give you a path to creating and building a story for the information that you're trying to convey. Because whether you're a restaurant trainer or a hotel trainer, whatever the case is, whether it's a presentation, whether it's a specific facilitation, whether it's a training in and of itself, a story is what takes us, it's what grabs us and what moves us into the next piece. And so first and foremost, we'll start with the why behind the story, which is the concept. For concepts, stories shape how we see ourselves and the world around us. So it's important to frame your presentation and training and your work as an epic adventure. And this could be something like The Dragon in the City, which is basically taking your concept, your story, and doing it in an epic adventure to get people excited about your plan or strategy. It could be about secrets and puzzles, because everybody loves secrets and puzzles. There's something that captures our attention about if there's a puzzle to be solved or a secret that we don't know. Let me share with you a secret to storytelling. And now I've got you hooked. I've got the story being built now in front of you, and I'm bringing you in because I have a secret or a puzzle. You could use the concept of order and chaos, when things are chaotic versus when there's order, because each story contains three things: the known, the unknown, and the hero. You can clarify your mission by framing your story around these three items through order and chaos. You could have a story about rules, cheats, and rebels, which we'll dive into shortly here. But this is all about keeping your team hooked to find out what happens when someone breaks the rules. Everybody loves a good story about a rule breaker. Or you could go high level and just go good versus evil, the right versus wrong. But this gives your story stakes from the beginning. And it's all just conceptual ways of how to tell a story differently, how to build a story differently, no matter what it's about. That can give you a frame of reference to be able to take it and run with it. So we're going to move into rules, cheats, and rebels specifically. This is where you tell us as the audience a rule, and then you show somebody breaking it. You've got our attention now. Will they be punished or vindicated? So what do Eve, Pandora, and Peter Rabbit all have in common? They were given rules and they broke them. We all live by rules, so we pay very close attention to stories about anyone who breaks them. The moment we see somebody break a rule, we have that instinctive want and desire to know what's going to happen next. And so as you're building your story, you need to understand who's the rule breaker in your story. It could be you, the innovator. Maybe it's the user. Maybe it's the person that you're training. Maybe it's the stakeholder. Maybe it's the customer, the guest that you help. but find who your rule breaker is in your story. Then you're going to want to set out all the possible rules that the hero of your story could break. And remember that most of the rules that we live by are not written down. There are things that you can create to be a rule that aren't really written anywhere, but we all know, oh, wait a second, you're not allowed to do that. And then lastly, you're going to want to play the story out in two different directions. There's two different ways that the rules, the cheats, and the rebels can go. And that's the first section where you have your rebel, and a rebel acts selflessly, and at cost to themselves. The rebels break society's rules to obey a higher rule, and rebels are unabashed about what it is that they do. So you might have a story where you're trying to prove that we're going to do things differently at work, and we are going to do things and take care of a guest in a way that nobody ever has before. And you create a story about a rebel who did this first and foremost. And you could have this Robin Hood figure at the start of your story. And now you're giving me information in this way that's not just, these are our standards of hospitality or what we do. It's not just a graph or data, it's a story now. I'm enraptured, I'm engaged. Or you could do it from the opposite side about the cheat. And the cheats act selfishly to avoid cost to themselves. Cheats break the rules that the rest of us have to follow. And cheats hide their actions, they're sneaky. So if you want to do a training about integrity, potentially at work, a cheat story is the great way to go, because everybody wants to see the cheat be punished. Everybody wants to see the cheat be punished, but they want to see the rebel be glorified and thanked for what it is that they did. So that's really an example of the idea of a conceptual story. Next, we're going to go into the explore category. And as we explore, stories help us navigate confusing, unknown, and changing situations, right? This helps us make a map for our way ahead. If we don't know where to go, this is really what helps us. And so different types of exploratory stories could be the emotional dashboard. This is the one we'll dive into a little bit more, but this is where you find your story's heart and you connect your audience through emotion. You could do data detectives, where you explain your data that would typically be in a graph, but you do it in a way that it creates attachment by zooming in and out on the big picture, like a film noir detective that discovered a clue and is going to solve the crime. You could talk about thoughtful failures, and that's where we learn from our mistakes, because that happens after the fact. But most mistakes are actually made after careful planning. So through the thoughtful failure story, we're able to highlight both sides to really explore the story and maybe where we went wrong, because we don't typically fall into a thoughtful failure. We get there through strategic planning that just goes awry. And then lastly, the explore pieces, that's funny. Because the most exciting phrase actually to hear in science is not eureka, but rather, that's funny. So when you inject these moments, these aha moments into your story, it starts hooking your learner into, oh, I want to know that. I want to know what they discovered. I want to be a part of the exploration. I want to be a part of the journey. So for an example of the emotional dashboard, how you would use this within your storytelling and story building. This is a way to look for strong emotions when you need to find a story. What made you feel the way that you felt, and then what happened next? Because emotions are our dashboard indicators, flashing red if we're being thwarted or glowing nicely if it's all going to plan. We constantly monitor each other's feelings. We're always aware of how those are feeling around us. So when you find a strong emotion, you know that you're onto a good story. You just have to hook into it. So maybe if you're talking or selling in a project, or maybe if you're talking about a new menu item or a new feature that you're going to be rolling out, you can latch into the emotions side. Which have you felt on your project? Happiness, confidence, love, delight, trust, pride. Or maybe on the other side of the spectrum, boredom, fear, disgust, shame, doubt, hate. I have doubt on there twice. Whoopsie. But then you can start writing sentences, turning these strong emotions into a beat of the story. I felt blank when I realized about this change or new information or this new product or this new item because I wanted blank. And so I had this reaction. I had this lesson learned. Stories don't have to be novels, they don't have to be books, but rather you taking the step back and creating an emotional attachment to something or somebody else's emotional attachment that they may have had can be all of the hook that you need to really create that moment with your learner where they have the equilibration and they start balancing their accommodation and their assimilation. Next, we need to know who the characters in our stories are because stories connect us to other people. So you, as the storyteller, as the trainer, you really have to show us as the learner why we can trust you. What is it about why we can trust you? So there's different ways that we could possibly do this through our story. Whether it's the whole trust me, I'm an expert piece, where you tell a story that shows your character and values in action to win our trust. Or maybe the what's my motivation in this scene? We've all heard actors or the stereotypical actor say, what's my motivation here? Because we want to think through everybody's motivation factor to understand how someone will react or respond to the idea of what we're presenting. We can also have drive stories, and drive stories is what we'll dive into a little bit more. But that's all about motivating your team through stories that are about the work, through autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Maybe your story characters are the hero and the guide story. The hero and the guide. For every story, maybe your learner can be the story, the hero of the story, right? And you're the guide. Because for every Luke Skywalker, there's a Yoda. Every learner needs a guide on their quest. So how can you shape your story through the framework of your learner actually being the hero and you're just their spirit quest guide? But always with the character pieces, we want to make sure that we're cutting to the chase because as a wise person once said, thou shalt not be dull. So cut to the chase, ditch the backstory, and get straight to the action, the emotion, or the meaning. Tell me exactly what it is that I need to be knowing. But I really love to use the tactic of drive stories. Drive stories in the hospitality industry really do resonate. Why do you work? For the money, yes, absolutely. But what really drives us? Drive stories are all about the stories that build a better team culture. If you want innovation first, you have to have inner motivation. Change comes by way of hard work for an uncertain reward. So it's up to us through drive stories to really find ways to tell stories that show a different way of working with autonomy, mastery, and purpose. These are great stories to use and a great tactic to use as you're telling about culture or a culture build or where things were to where they are now. And what's more resonating with this generation that we are privileged to work with today than drive stories, creating this connection to culture and what it is, how we do, what we do. And so, yes, money is important, absolutely. But people also want autonomy, a sense that they have control over the way they work. So we can talk about the time and place you work or the tools that you're going to use, the people you work with or the direction you follow. This can give you how we work together stories. You can use mastery, a sense that your skills are steadily improving through your storytelling. And this can give you how we grow stories. Or purpose, a sense that you are doing worthwhile work or serving a greater good. And this can give you why we do it stories. When we think about mastery, I go back to a story that I tell and that I use when I'm talking about creating an intuitive training culture, where when I first learned how to use a knife, I was hired to a burrito chain concept that's pretty popular. And they asked me during my interview, do you know how to use a knife? And I said, yeah, I can use a chef's knife because I had barely used one in a previous job, but I was not skilled whatsoever. So when I started learning, I was really fumbling around and I didn't really know how to use this knife. I couldn't really use it that well. So what I started doing was setting a metronome to get faster and faster. And I had the metronome going slowly at first, but with every click of the metronome, click, 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 I'd move my knife to that beat, getting the repetition down, getting the cut sizes accurate and correctly. And then I was able to get the metronome going more quickly, more quickly, more quickly. And just through that easy way of doing it, through that different way of thinking about it, I was able to improve my skills and create this mastery around this sense of preparation within the restaurant. And then from there, you have the how we grow story right there. And it's just as simple as that, being able to really tell a story that shows that aha moment and get somebody to latch on to what it is that you're saying. From here, we'll go into the function tactics with storytelling, because stories are more effective than facts or opinions by themselves. So you want to put your stories to work. So we think about pitch perfect, and that's where you need 2 pitches at all times for what it is that you're trying to train or show or present. You need the elevator pitch to sell me on why I need to listen. And then you're going to need a little pop to add into your story, which we'll get into here very shortly. Or you need a simple sales story. A tale as old as time falls into 2 categories when you're trying to sell an item or to sell a reason of why you're trying to do something different. Either someone you like buys this or does this, or someone like you buys this or does this. So someone you like or someone like you are these to be able to sell something into somebody as to why they should do something. Or there's icebreaker stories where you create engagement through icebreakers and refer back to the process. You can do this in many different ways. You can get a bunch of different photographs together and have somebody create a story on their own based off of these photographs, putting them all together and telling a story on their own. And then all of a sudden now you can take those photos that you were presenting them and leverage it into what it is that you're actually trying to work through. It's just different ways to think about how to train something into existence, or a great way to have an icebreaker with engagement at the beginning of a presentation that you're going to be doing by having them tell a story to you first. But as we get into pitch perfect, this is all about convincing me to your idea. Why should I back your idea? Show me what have you got that I need, and why should I trust you to deliver on what you're saying? Because everything that we do requires someone to back exactly what we're doing. And remember, you're also competing with everybody else in your organization that's trying to roll something out or sell something through at the very same time as your learner. So you need at least 1 or maybe 2 stories to always bring your pitch to life and make your pitch stick. So first, that starts with having an elevator pitch for your idea, or what it is that you're trying to present. What is the topic? What is the training that you're doing? Have the elevator pitch. What's the problem you're solving? How do you solve it? And why should I trust you? And then add some pop. You can set this pitch out like a story arc, accentuating the negative and positive stages and creating drama through your pitch. So the problem, what needs fixing right now? The opportunity, what's available? What are the practical steps? If we do it, it won't be easy. It's going to be a challenge. But if we get it right, it's going to be great. And just having this as a part of your daily pitch, whether it's a large one for what it is that you're trying to sell or do, it's a great way to utilize a quick, easy story that you're telling and writing in the moment to create some level of traction and connection to what it is that you're doing. Every story also needs structure. Stories carry us along thanks to a few basic patterns. So making your ideas flow in a story-ish way really helps. The man in a hole example. This is the story about how anybody can fall into a hole, but hardly anybody ever falls out of one. We know that we have to climb out. And we show that through the lessons that we learned. And being able to use a story about maybe a time that you fell into a hole or something happened and how you were able to climb out of it could be a great way to train something or sell something in to your learner. You also have rags to riches, the rise to success from humble beginnings. When we think of the Steve Jobs of the world, the rags to riches story always connects people to what it is. This is a great way to use your founder and the history of the organization that you work for, if that's something that you're trying to train, using the rags to riches example, because you too can do this through hidden value. There's the no easy way structure. The fact that nothing good is ever easy, because if it was good and easy, we'd be doing it already. Or the pride and fall, or the pride and the downfall, the Icarus story, right? Something that's too good to be true usually is. So convince your skeptics by getting ahead of their skepticism, by already talking about going through the pride and the fall and what that could look like. And then you can show them why it's good to stay within the lane that you're trying to present them, or what that might be. Or if you're ever in a pinch, you can use the 5 T's. The 5 T's of structure for storytelling are timeline, turning points, tensions, temptations, and teachable moments. This is an easy way to quickly be able to tell a quick story and sell something in right off the bat. But through no easy way, nothing good is ever easy. If something was good and easy, like we said, we'd be doing it. So think of all the miracle diets and the fitness fads that promise instant results. We don't actually believe a word of it, because quick fixes might seem like no-brainers, but there's natural distrust to it. So we insult our learners if we don't tell it like it is and how it will be. We have to show them that it's going to be challenging, but what's on the other side. So you use this ultimate roller coaster ride. We talk about the problem, a bad place, right? We talk about Harry Potter as an example. Harry Potter lives under the stairs. That's a problem. He's in a bad place. Then we spike up to early success, where the hero takes an opportunity and things start to change. Harry goes off to Hogwarts. Everything's different. We have the quick setback, where their own weakness or the reaction of others makes things bad, whether that's the Dementors, the Death Eaters, or the Slytherins, which I know some of you probably here in the Slytherin house and would resent the fact that I say that that would make things bad. But then we go even further down into the crisis mode. It gets so bad that maybe the hero would have been better off under the stairs without the change. Then we can use the recovery, where the hero learns where true strength lies, relying on friends, the power of love, and we end up in the better place, where danger is averted and potential is realized. This is just a quick way to be able to navigate and sell a story. And you can use one that already exists, or you can take your example, your item that you're trying to sell across, and turn it into the ultimate roller coaster ride yourself. With style. Style is a tactic all about stories and making sure that people remember yours. So you can do this through movie time, where you use abstract concepts that are hard to visualize because nothing actually happens. So tell your story in a way that brings those to life. Or story hooks, where you have an attention grabber at the start, because if you lose them early, it's too late. You can always use the magic number. All of us know what the magic number is, whether it's little pigs, wise men, or magic wishes. The easiest way to convey quick bullets is through using the magic number. Or you can find your own Rolls-Royce moment, which we'll dive into here. And by Rolls-Royce moment, there was an advertisement in the 1960s that Rolls-Royce came out with. It said, cruising at 60 miles an hour, the loudest noise inside the Rolls-Royce comes from the electric clock. And that ad was memorable for such a reason. Your story, what you're trying to sell, can also have a Rolls-Royce moment. The very next year, 1961, Ford spent millions of dollars in the 60s on an ad campaign promising cars as quiet as the Rolls-Royce, because it was a vivid, memorable moment that people latched onto and they were able to understand. So David Ogilvy, the advertising genius behind that ad, wrote the ticking clock headline, spending days going through tons of reports of engineers. And his lesson was, do your homework. Your story has to have a vivid moment. In just a few words, we were given a rich sensory movie we could play in our heads. So your story, what's the moment that you can describe? Something the learner can hear, see, taste, smell, or feel. It's an exemplary moment. This one small moment stands for the whole. It tells us that a Rolls-Royce is a precision engineering company that pays attention to details. What's the single factor detail that tells us everything we need to know? But also it's widely relatable. By that, I mean, even if you've never driven a Rolls-Royce, which I have not, or I've never ridden in one, I know what my car sounds like at 60 miles an hour, and it's very loud. So this paints the picture, even though we didn't need to actually experience it. How can you make your moment relatable to what your learner, your audience are going to understand? It's all about the style that you use when you're telling your story. And the last function of storytelling and storytelling tactics is organizing it appropriately. Stories work so long as you use them well. So you should plan how you're going to tell yours. And you can do this through a story bank, collecting your best stories and the information behind them so that you can continually reference them moving forward over and over. Big, small, inside, outside. All the different stories have an intended audience, and using the right one in the wrong place will not get you to the end result that you're looking for. And then also knowing your audience profile, telling your story right. If you don't know the intended audience, you're going to be in a challenging position to have the message resonate. So we'll break down into the example of big, small, inside, outside. You might have a big story to tell, but you'll actually spend more time telling small stories to your colleagues and your learners. So dependent on the situation, you'll need to know, do I need a big story, a small story, an inside or an outside? Big is the rehearsed ones of the why or the what's next from one person to many people. And small stories are spontaneous through conversation. And what this could look like for your organization or what it is that you're using this for could be different. Induction, awards, appraisal, training, habit, culture, social media, blog, a conference, it's all different. And they all relate to different places and different things. And so through that, maybe a small story inside, we would use the explore function that we've talked about so far. Habit, training, appraisal, and culture. We really want to explore with our learner together. Maybe for a small story for the outside, if we're trying to present ourselves to somebody that's outside of our organization, a blog, a social post, our brand image, we would use characters. We would use people included in what we do and tell a story about people that work for us. For a big story, for inside, we'd use a character and we'd use a pizzazz, a style, find what's going to be relatable, whether it's an awards ceremony or an induction of some sort into the brand. Or big stories for outside, for a pitch, a recruitment, a conference, we'd want to use the function and concept tactics. These are just different ways that you could do something. And for this, I'd like to go to a story that I heard this week, actually, from the former CEO of Jimmy John's. He was in a panel, and he told this story about Freaky Fast and where Freaky Fast came from with Jimmy John's. And it was a very quick story, but he said they were in a meeting room with an ad agency trying to come up with what it was that they were going to pitch to Jimmy John himself. And they were at the end of this 2-hour meeting and they just had nothing. And he said, I just want something freaking fast because we have to present it very soon. And in that moment right there is where Freaky Fast came from. Just out of this natural environment of trying to come up with something, it came out of nowhere. And I just got such a kick out of that. But this small story for outside, and he used this character perspective of himself in this meeting, and he painted this picture that I thought was just very dynamic and really insightful. So as you tell your story, think about your intended audience and what they're going to learn from it. So as we begin to wrap up, I want you to start thinking of any questions that you may have, because these are all storytelling tactics, but you're probably trying to start thinking of where to start your story. Well, a lot of the examples we use from these tactics can all be helpful for how to build a story appropriately about what it is that you're doing, or maybe something that you've done or experienced. But the story that you tell doesn't always have to be your own. Sometimes inspiration and analogy happen naturally. So connect the dots for your audience to help them begin to derive the connections that we want to get from them. From this, what I like to talk about is a series that I've done for my organization, for PIADA, where we've actually begun to use the show, The Bear, as an analogy for what it is that we do and how they can turn around their restaurant or motivate their teams or get their teams invested in what it is that we do day in and day out. And so we were able to present this and break it down into a training and a learning where we take part of the actual show itself and we start building it together to show them what they can do in their restaurant and real life practical takeaways. The story that you tell doesn't always have to be your own, but you can make it your own through it. And what this does for our learners is it connects them to something more. Every story has already been written. Oops, sorry, that skipped ahead on me. I apologize. Let me go back a slide real quick. So, wow, the system is working well. So thank you for paying attention there. So for edutainment, with what it is that we're trying to relay to our learners, edutainment is this concept of the combination of education and entertainment. And I truly believe that with today's learner, we have to create something that's sticky for them, something that they can go back to, something that can make them roll their eyes or maybe chuckle. But using edutainment as a part of your story allows you to be creative in a way that doesn't always require a beginning, a middle, and an end. Whether it's you using characters as a part of your training. For the chart high five presentation that I did in Orlando last year, we talked about a training that we created at PIADA with one of our vendors, some of our partners, that was all about these characters. And one of the characters was Captain Obvious. And Captain Obvious was there to tell the learner all of the things that are uncomfortable for our general managers to have to say. Things like you need to wear deodorant or brush your teeth before you come to work. But this Captain Obvious character always gets a laugh, it gets an eye roll, but people then remember what Captain Obvious says. So by using edutainment as much as possible through your stories and through your trainings, you give your audience something they can come back to again and again that they can remember. So if you want to see any examples of some of this in action, please find me on LinkedIn, add me. I'd love to connect there. LinkedIn.com/IN/Corbin Nichols. And if you navigate to my video section, you'll actually see that I've edited down the talk of the bear and the presentation that we did for our organization and put it into a small video form. And you can take that and watch those and interact with those and see exactly how you can use a story to convey a message through your organization and what it is that you're looking to do. I have some other stories, examples in there as well. Some that I like from the days that I first started with a brand, where I talked about how to really get great at doing something over and over again and the repetition that comes with that. So some really good examples of what to do there, but please add me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect. And then with that being said, I'd love to slide into the Q&A section and answer any questions that you all may have.
Okay, thank you so much, Corbin. All right, the first question I have is the image of high school Corbin in the white Backstreet Boys white sweatsuit available in a poster size?
I'd be happy to send you that image along. Absolutely.
Okay, the second question is, can you tell us a time where you used the wrong story tactic for your audience?
So there have been times that I've done that before, where I'm I'm thinking that somebody's meeting me at a specific place and they're not, right? Maybe I jumped straight in to the reason and the methodology behind something, but I never actually used the explore function to explain why it was that we were going on this journey or what it was that we were intending to solve. So it's really all about finding what is that starting point of the story. If your team already knows the culture and the history and you feel confident that the culture of your organization is already known, then you don't really have to do one of those founding stories. You can jump in and give a character example and show and reaffirm why the culture is so great versus the story of how the organization came to be. So that's an example of a time that I've used one incorrectly. Specifically was I tried giving storytelling of an employee that worked for our organization, but what people didn't realize was even the story of the organization itself. We had never actually communicated to them where we came from, why we were founded, what the inspiration was. So this connective story was great, but it just didn't resonate appropriately with everybody.
Okay. And next second question is, which type of story do you find the most compelling? One where you tell where you are the main character, or one where you tell the story of another person?
Well, it's a great question, and it really depends on what it is that you're trying to present. But what I would say to you is stories about us are great for people that know us. Stories about others are great for everybody because everybody can relate to somebody specifically, right? When we get into that, I would always say that if you can put your learner or your trainee as the hero of the story, that's such a great place to be, because then they're actually engaged with the topic the most that they could possibly be because they're going through the journey themselves.
Okay. Is there a technique you use to have your learners tell stories during a learning session?
So with that specifically, if I'm doing a learning session, I'd like to go into the icebreaker route, icebreaker photos, where you're really creating something where you're getting them to tell a story and put a spin on something that could just be stagnant. You print out a bunch of different photos, or you could put photos up on the screen if that's a better case scenario. And in small groups, you have them work together to create a narrative based off of the photographs that you're displaying and showing. From there, you can really start diving into exactly why they told that story a specific way. And they're going to give you some level of insight into what it is that they want to see or know, or what attracts them to something. And then you can take that and put your spin on it. And you can continually refer back to the stories that were created in the room, and people have a connection to them because they helped create them.
Okay. Next question is, you touched on some great examples and broke it down for us, but I'm curious to know if you have video webinar information where you dive deeper into psychological pieces.
I don't have any other video information, but what I would say is YouTube University is a great place to go. That's actually where I started learning about Jean Piaget as I was learning about education and where storytelling really comes from and why it's so important. And so just spending time learning from others and learning about the psychological processes of everything, you can find all of that information through YouTube easily. And it's actually really beneficial because you get to learn through somebody else's story also and see what would you have done a little bit differently.
If you have to improvise, what type of story would you recommend?
So I think it's always easy if you have something to connect the story to. And it's all really about finding what is the common theme. With the bear, it's really easy to plan something out because there's a story arc happening there. And I work in a restaurant, so it's a very easy connecting point where I can always reference that, right? And so I'm doing this style piece, if you will. But ultimately, when you have to create a story on the fly and you're having to improvise, it's really good to be able to do something where you're going to explore their emotional dashboard, where you can find a heart to the story and connect to that. Because if you can connect to an emotion, that is a feeling that everybody has experienced before. And no matter what data or what it is that you're trying to break across and show through, you're going to have somebody be able to connect to that.
Okay, and we have two last questions, so we can finish in an hour. The first is, what's your recommendation of where to start when you're looking to tell a story for a project?
When you're looking to tell a story for a project, I would say just find where are the common themes of what you learned, what were the huge emotional pieces that you experienced as you went through, and really, I'll be happy to send you any of this information as well, but refer back to the webinar for the flow chart and use that flow chart that we showed at the beginning to find what type of story should I really be telling here.
All right, and last question is, what was your response? What was the response to using the bear with your team to tell a story?
So I wasn't sure exactly how they were going to respond to it, but it's now become this talking point within our culture where when I do see people, they're bringing up and relating what they did in their restaurant to an episode of The Bear. And it's now become this like pseudo mascot, if you will, for what it is that we're doing and the progress that we've made, which we've seen incredible progress as an organization since that presentation. I don't attribute it to that, but it's really cool to be able to see people have that aha moment and make a connection to the story.
Okay, all right, that's all we have. Thank you so much, Corbin. And you brought it in exactly 1 hour. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.